Today's guest on a Life and a Living podcast is Rachael Robertson. Now, Rachael is a fascinating lady. She qualified with an MBA from Melbourne University, which is an achievement in itself. But then a couple of years later, she answered an ad looking for somebody to lead an expedition to Antarctica. Now, there's a shift, right? She applied for a position because she was just curious about what the questions that would be asked in the interview process, and you can hear her talk about that. And to her amazement, she actually got the job and she led the expedition. So she spent 12 months leading a team of 120 people in the Antarctica. Quite an extraordinary experience. And she talks really about what she experienced, and she talks about the leadership lessons that she learned during that time. And really, some of the things that she talks about are fascinating. She talks about the fact that, she says that, respect trumps harmony in a team every single time. And she actually wrote a book to that name. But she has a really interesting take on what that means. And I think it's very, very important for us to actually recognize that harmony, is valuable, but it is not the be all and end all for a team, particularly if you're looking for a high performing team. But she also talks about, she has a take on that she built a team of leaders as opposed to building a team of followers, and it's a really important distinction. And she also talks, amongst other things, talked about managing through a crisis, and what the differentiation is for a leader managing through a crisis, and the 4 pillars that she has that really stood her in good stead as she did that. So, fascinating interview. If you want to get more, you can go to my website, www.johnmurphyinternational.com, and hit the podcast tab, where there's loads of more information and great content. But in the meantime, sit back and enjoy a fantastic lady, Rachael Robertson. Rachael, it's a great honor to have you on the show today. I really am thrilled to have you here as a guest on The Life and a Living. But I have to say, it's quite a jump to go from graduating with an MBA from Melbourne University to leading an expedition to Davis Station. So how in God's name did that happen?
Oh, it is, John. And I would love to sit here and say it was a strategic career move or something I planned. It wasn't. I saw the job advertised in a newspaper, and for the job was station leader in Antarctica. And what intrigued me was the Antarctic division, so that's the employer, which is the government. They recruit for qualities, so they recruit for resilience, empathy and integrity. And you don't need to know a thing about Antarctica, you just need to be able to demonstrate resilience, empathy and integrity. And I read that and I thought, what a fantastic way to recruit people. What a ripper way to recruit people who've got the qualities you need for the job, and then teach them the technical aspects. And I was managing customer service staff, and I really wanted customer service staff who had resilience and empathy. So my plan was to apply for the job just so I could get to the job interview stage, so I could find out what the questions were they were asking people, and I was going to copy their questions and bring them back to my team. And it was only after I applied I find out they don't actually have an interview. They have a boot camp in the Central Highlands of Southern Australia for a week. So I end up in this boot camp with 13 men competing for a job I didn't particularly want. And then they rang and offered it to me. And I thought, you know what, I'd rather regret what I did than regret what I didn't do. So it was purely an opportunity that came my way. I thought, I'll have a crack at this. Yeah. I got the job, and yeah, it was just an opportunity.
It's fantastic because when you talk about leading an expedition, in your head, or at least in my head, it's kind of a half dozen people. But this is a team of 120 people, wasn't it? This was an extraordinary challenge, not only to take where it was and what it was, but actually to lead 120 people when you probably didn't have that much experience of leading people, did you?
And that's the point that I had to get my head around too. So it was leading 120 people over summer. So summer in Antarctica is sort of, October to around February. And they're all scientists doing climate change research, or they're tradespeople doing construction work. And then they go home in February, and then for the next 9 months, a little team of 18 of us stay behind, and the 18 of us just keep the place running and keep it warm. We're there just for asset maintenance. And so I really had to get my head around the fact in summer when I'm managing these 120 people and I've got planes and helicopters that I'm sending out all around the continent, that I had to say to myself, I'm not managing an Antarctic science program, I'm managing people. And so I'd managed people for a long time, and I'd managed a mostly male dominated workforce. So it didn't phase me working, leading all men, and it didn't phase me leading remotely. But I just had to keep saying to myself, I'm managing people. I'm not managing an Antarctic science program, because I knew nothing. I didn't even know there was a science called glaciology. And I had to learn glaciology and geology and
Yeah.
geomorphology and seismology. It was extraordinary.
And how did
Yeah.
they, I mean, how did they feel? I can imagine in that sort of group, it's a very male dominated industry. How did they respond to being managed and led by this, young graduate with an MBA who knows nothing about the
Mm.
Antarctica? And now, how did they respond to you? And how did you manage to actually win them over?
They were really good, but I won them over by being honest with them and saying to them, my background is not in Antarctic research. I'm not a climate change specialist. I'd worked as a park ranger, so I knew a little bit about natural resource management, but I certainly didn't know any of the sciences. I certainly didn't know any of the trades. I didn't know anything about diesel mechanics or electricians
Yeah.
or plumbers or carpenters. But by just saying to them, I would ask for their input for any decision making. I would make the ultimate decision, but I would go to them and seek their input into the decision. And when I was offered the job, I actually asked the employer, I said, why did you pick me? And there are other people who I thought were more qualified, so why did you pick me? And they said to me, we like your leadership philosophy, which is that leadership is about creating more leaders. It's not about creating more followers. And in an environment like Antarctica, where you're managing your team 24/7, so it's their home and their workplace, you have to be really sensitive to that. And there's a grey area because you've got your boss after hours. You're sitting there, you might be at work and then you go and have dinner and your boss is at the dinner table. So it requires a really sensitive sort of empathy to work out when to step in and when to stay out of it as the boss down there. And I think that works much better in that environment than the old sort of command and control structure where you tell people what to do. And so the team were fantastic with me. I had no issues with them, but equally, I very early on from our get to know you barbecue. So I didn't recruit them. So the day we met each other, I came up with the mantra that respect trumps harmony. And it was to take away that pressure of we all have to love each other and we all have to like each other. I just said, no, we don't, and we won't, and we didn't.
Mm.
But we will always treat each other respectfully. And that took away a lot of that pressure of them needing to like me or them needing to like each other and me having to please them. I didn't have to. They just needed to respect my role and my position, and I needed to respect their experience. And
Yeah.
together it worked really well.
Interesting. I mean, you mentioned the respect trumps harmony, which is the name of a book that you published, and in that you say that that harmony is kind of overrated, and can even be dangerous, and that if you're looking to build a high performing team, that it's much more down to respect. Can you just elaborate on that?
I really worry about teams that are built on harmony. And by harmony, I mean, we all want harmony. We all do. No one wants to work in a team that's not harmonious. But my concern is that when the two are in contradicting each other, and that's why I chose the word Trump very, very carefully, especially given the connotations in the USA. And I chose that word carefully because there is no other word that communicates that respect. When the two are going head to head, respect must trump harmony. You want both, but respect must be the overriding one. It must have sovereignty. And the reason for that is when you put harmony first, things happen. So innovation won't happen. You will not innovate with a team where harmony is the number one thing, because people won't offer a difference of opinion or a conflicting view, or they don't want to disagree with someone because, oh, I don't want to rock the boat. The other issue is safety and mental health. So if someone's doing something unsafe, people won't step in and stop them because, oh, I don't want to get involved.
Yeah.
And equally mental health, if the focus is harmony and isn't all fantastic here, no one puts their hand up and says, actually, I'm not so great right now, I'm struggling a bit. And so when you've got this harmony, it's under pressure, it will shatter. My team were brilliant in a crisis. We had a plane crash and they were fantastic in a crisis, but it was because we had a bedrock of respect. We didn't love each other. We didn't even like each other, some of them, but we treated each other with respect. And that was, when it got down to the tough times, we were fantastic as a team.
I think it's really interesting you say that, because one of the things that because I work with teams a lot, as you do, you speak about it and write about it. And one of the things I'll say that, it's to build a high performance team is a challenge, right? But and some people say, oh, it must be great to be in and to work in a high performance team, which it is, and it's rare enough to actually get it. But it's also a tough place to be, because in a high performance team, people hold each other accountable for what they say they're going to do. So it goes back to your point. It's actually about, because you really need to be somebody who delivers, and they're also that you can be held accountable and that your views can be challenged. Because if we're all happy clappy, then we don't want to disturb the happy clappy. And therefore, you're not actually improving the performance of the team over a period. So I absolutely agree with you. Can I go back to the Antarctica just for a second? Because a full year in the Antarctica, which has got to be an extraordinary experience. You've got months of near total darkness. You don't have any social media, no Facebook, no Instagram, I assume, no anything like that.
No.
Very little contact with the outside world. How did that affect you? How did you deal with it, first of all? And then secondly, what impact did it have on you afterwards? Because you went in having all of that connection, then you don't have it. So what was the difference when you came out?
Yeah, it was huge. I'll go back to the first question. So being in that environment, small things are magnified, and it's similar to all of the lockdowns that we're all experiencing around the world this year with the pandemic. Little things really go under the spotlight, and little things will irritate us more. So my job as the leader was to raise these issues and deal with them in a respectful, professional manner, so that people didn't explode with anger or didn't spiral with depression. So yeah, that was the charter for me down there, was to just create a culture where we'd speak up professionally and respectfully. Coming home, I was totally unprepared for, and I do have concerns for people now coming out of isolation for that reason, that I had planned for the expedition and that was okay, but coming home, things that overwhelmed me were things like sensory, so noise. Noise is huge when you've been in isolation for a long time. You come back and there's cars and there's sirens and cities and it's noisy. Physical contact. So when you haven't had a cuddle or a hug for so long, even people now living alone in lockdown will come back out into the world, and there'll be other people wanting to hug them, and it will be like, whoa, hang on, because they haven't had a handshake for months. And the other one was overwhelm. I think I was overwhelmed with choices. For when you're in lockdown or isolation, you don't have much choice in what you do or what you eat or where you go. And then suddenly you've got all this choice. So it's quite overwhelming. And I think right now around the world, as people come out of isolation, we'll have a spectrum. We'll have people who just can't wait for this to be over and they can't wait to get back out to having their weekends. There'll be others who are quite enjoying not having to make these sort of choices on weekends, and they'll be quite anxious about going back to their workplace. And there's a whole swag of people in the middle, I hope, who are sort of, looking forward to it, but a little bit anxious. But I think for leaders, the most important thing is understanding there'll be this spectrum, that some people will be like this and others will be like that. And we just don't know how people will respond. What we do know is it won't be one size fits all.
And as a leader, what did you, when you coming out of that environment and then getting out into the real world, for want of a better term, what did you actually take from that to bring into your work and what you do and the lessons? Because I know that you wrote a book called, Leading on the Edge, and it's all about the kind of leadership insights that you got from this most extraordinary place. So what were some of the insights that you got while you were there, and then how did you apply them when you left?
It was fascinating because most of the insights I picked up were pure necessity. So I'll just give you one example, is no triangles. And no triangles just means I don't speak to you about John. If I have something to say to him, I go directly to him. I don't take it to a third party, because that's disrespectful. That was born of necessity. That was because the guys were coming to me saying, oh, he did this and nah, nah, nah. And I said, okay, do you want me to deal with this? And they said, no, I'm just telling you. And I actually said out loud once, I said, but hang on, if I don't speak to him and you don't speak to him, you and I will have this conversation next week. And then in my head, I've gone, oh my God, I'm here for 52 weeks and that's one person, there's 16 others. I'm going to have this conversation thousands of times. And I thought, I can't do that. I just cannot do that. So that's where I said, right, let's have no triangles. And I got the team together and I said, from now on, no triangles. How about that? We build respect in the team. If you have something to say, you go directly to the person. Put your hand up if you agree. Everyone's hand went up. It meant the next time someone came to me and started to complain about someone, I could look them in the eye and say, hang on, why are you talking to me about this? I saw you put your hand up and commit to no triangles. Why are you not talking to them? And that simple tool I've brought with me out into the workplace now. And when I'm talking to teams, I talk about no triangles. And honestly, I wish I had done no triangles 20 years ago, 30 years ago when I first started out in the workforce, because it actually has changed my life, because it frees up so much time and energy as a leader. Those conversations are exhausting. They go nowhere. They're just people complaining and they are exhausting. And I knew I needed to go and see my good people in Antarctica and tell them you're doing a great job, but I didn't have the energy. I was so darn tired from these triangle conversations. So as soon as I implemented a culture of no triangles, it freed up my time and my energy, and it changed my life. And so that's one of the tools I talk to leaders about now. And it really, it improves innovation, it improves performance, it improves morale, respect. We've got the research now to show that. The scary thing was that of the 200 teams we surveyed, 89% said it freed up time and energy. And in 30% of cases, it was up to 1 hour a day. And I'm just blown away. An hour a day you could save, yeah. And spend it on important stuff.
What tends to happen if you allow that to happen is that if you're my boss and I come and I'm venting about, Mary over here, right? Then I'm trying to make it your problem.
Yes.
When in actual fact, it's my problem and I'm not dealing with it. So to a large extent, we're kind of having a futile conversation, really, aren't we, when we do that?
We really are. And I thought naively or wrongly as a leader, I thought that when my team were talking to me, like for the 15 years before I was working, before I went to Antarctica, I just thought if they're just venting or they're letting off steam and I'm not actually contributing to the issue because I'm just listening to them, they're just, telling me, and that's my job as a leader. And I realized actually, no, I'm condoning that. I'm saying it's okay for you to complain and whinge and, talk
because
behind someone's
you
back.
are being complicit in just by giving it airtime.
Spot on. And that's when I realized, wow, by me even listening to the conversation, I'm saying it's okay. And so from then on, I just said, no, it's not okay. You speak to them. If you can't sort it out, by all means, I will step in. That's my job. But out of respect, your first port of call needs to be that person directly.
Okay, so no triangles was one great insight. Other great insight, you have something called the Bacon Wars, which you have to explain.
I know, and it's not a metaphor. It legitimately was a bacon war. It was a fight between the diesel mechanics and the plumbers about whether the bacon should be cooked soft or crispy. And they actually came to me and said, we need to have a meeting to decide how this bacon should be cooked. And when I got to the bottom of it, I found out the relationship between the two teams had broken down over the use of a vehicle. And one team thought the other team was deliberately cooking the bacon the opposite way just to irritate them. And I thought, this has got nothing to do with bacon. This is actually about respect. And they're feeling disrespected. And I started to identify all of these little things that happen in teams that we seem to think, it's a little thing. And it's not. It's a symptom of a deeper issue. And the deeper issue is that lack of respect. And it's different all around the world. We've done research all around the world. But one of the really common ones is dirty coffee mugs or dirty staff tea rooms or coffee rooms where people leave their things lying around, or people who are always late for meetings. And I don't mean occasional, I mean always. And we say, it's only 10 minutes or it's only them. And it's not. No, it's disrespectful because you're implying my time's more important than your time. And so what I'm saying now, coming out of isolation, is it's a perfect time to reset our teams. And so if there's any of those bacon wars going on, if there's any of those little things that you hear about as a leader and you think it's only a small thing, I think have a think about whether it's a symptom of a deeper issue, and the deeper issue is the lack of respect. And now is the time to win those Baker wars. It's fight the Baker wars now while we can. We draw a line in the sand and say no, no more.
Because they're symptomatic. I mean, very often it's about, you know, trust has broken down somewhere in the relationship, and we're talking about something that's on the surface, but it's actually not about this
Exactly.
thing on the surface. It's actually much more. Talk to me about because you do talk about it in something I was reading there about, you know, leading through tough times, and you know what the role of the leader where you work, you're leading through a crisis, and you actually very intentionally use the word leading through a crisis. Can you
Mm.
maybe elaborate on that, because I thought that was a really good point.
And that came to the fore when we had that plane crash that I mentioned earlier. And I'm leading a search and rescue for the lives of 4 people who had crashed 300 miles or 500 kilometers away from the station. They had 10 days worth of food on board, but we couldn't fly this plane, and so they're effectively stuck there until I could get someone out to fix the plane. In my head is just reeling. My head, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do here. I've never led a search and rescue. But if I had gone out to my team and said to them, and they said, what are we doing? And I said, well, I don't know. I've never done this before. That doesn't instill confidence. And so even though I was really concerned, I had to choose my words carefully. So I had to say, I have concerns, because if I said I'm worried, being
Mm.
worried about someone is a lot different from when it's the leader saying it. So if I came out and said, oh, I'm really worried about those people, that's very different to saying I have concerns. Equally, my body language, excuse me, I had to be very poised and very calm, even though my head was just going 100 miles an hour. I needed to be very calm, because my job when you're leading through a crisis, or our job leading through a crisis, is to instill confidence and optimism and poise and say, we'll get through this. We will get through this. But the other really difficult thing was, and I think a lot of leaders will feel this, when you're in the middle of a crisis, your natural instinct is to hole up in the office and manage the crisis with your team, work out how do I manage the crisis. But I knew I needed to be seen about the place, because my team, it happened in summer. So I've got 115 people on the station. They needed to see me so they could ask me, what's happening? Are they okay? What are we doing? But if I'd stayed in the office just managing the search and rescue with the 5 other members of the search and rescue team, this whole rumor and innuendo would start with the rest of the community, and they'd be worried. They'd fill in the gaps, and the gap fillers are often worse than the reality. So you have this dual role where you're leading the crisis, but it's not enough to just lead. You need to be seen to be leading. So you need to be right out the front and communicating all the time. I think I sent out messages every hour to the team saying, look, I've got nothing further to update you from last time, but this is where we're at. And in my head was, oh my goodness, but I couldn't let that show. I had to be very poised and calm. So it taught me a lot about leading through a crisis.
And how, I mean, that's what you were doing on the outside, and there were all the right things to do. And essentially, you talk about the communication, and you were saying communication twice, 3 times a day. And
Mm.
I know from every organization that I've ever worked in that I've never heard them say, "Oh, we've got communication nailed." You know, nobody ever says that. But you were doing it. But how did you prepare yourself? Because that's, as I said, these are the things that you're doing on the outside. How did you prepare yourself internally in order to do that externally?
The thing that kept me strong through that crisis was just controlling what I can control. And it's similar. That's how I've lived through the pandemic, leading my family and my business and my clients. I've had to say I can only control this bit. So with the search and rescue, what I could control was my behavior. I could control my response. I could control my actions and words. I can't control the weather. So I thought on our best predictions that we could get an engineer out to this plane around about day 4 or day 5. But Antarctic weather is like nowhere else on the planet, like literally nowhere else on the planet. So a blizzard can come out of nowhere and all of your plans are thrown out the window. So I can't control the weather. So I just pushed that to the side. Like, can't control it. Don't even worry about it. Don't think about it. So being just focusing on what I can control, and what I can control is the immediate, what will we do in the next hour? What will we do in the next 24 hours? What will we do in the next 48 hours? What do I need to do to lead the rest of the team through this? And what do I need to do to lead myself? And that way it was less overwhelming. If I had sat down and considered that the lives of 4 people were in my hands and the decisions I made would potentially, threaten their lives, that would have just overwhelmed me. So I had to just break it down to, okay, right here, right now, at this particular minute, what is the best decision I can make to ensure the safety of these people and ensure that we get them home? And we got them home on day 5, but it was day 5. But it was a pretty scary episode, and it taught me a lot about controlling what you can control.
Yeah. Interesting. I was talking, just for you reminded me of it when you were talking there. I interviewed somebody who's in the armed forces, a very senior major general in the armed forces recently. And, he's talking about in that moment of war, talk about how you lead. And he said, you control your breathing. And,
Yes.
and he said, he said, that's what you, and I said, well, how do you get other people to do it? And he said, well, they watch you. So if you're doing it, they will do it. And I just thought it was really interesting that,
It's
it was about
contagious.
control. Yeah, that it is contagious, but it was just, if you taken, because so often when you see somebody who is under stress, their breathing is very shallow, they're taking short breaths. So they actually portray the sense of nervousness, agitation, and fear. And somebody who's breathing deeply and normally has that kind of calming effect. And that's kind of playing into what you were saying there.
It's 100%. And I talk to people about, that emotional regulation too, particularly young women who I'm mentoring around emotion, about showing
Yeah.
emotion at work. And, they'll say to me, I get really upset and I don't know what to do. And I said, well, you need to buy yourself a second or two just to get that poise back, just to breathe deeply and just to pull it back in. And even now, all the time with my family, sometimes I hear news about the pandemic and I have to go out and see my little boy, and my job as his leader, as his mum, I'm his leader. I need to say to him, be poised for him. So even if I
Yeah.
feel like I've read something or heard something and I feel like walking out and saying, oh my goodness, I don't do that. I poise, I bring it back, I take a deep breath,
Yeah.
I control my own emotion and my own breathing, and then, I act like a leader and I lead him.
One of the things that you said, just to go back, and I was just interested in asking you, that you talked about leading a team that didn't appear to have common ground. Can you just elaborate on that? Sorry, what I interpreted by what you were saying there was that you did a team of people and they had different goals. They hadn't necessarily common goals. And maybe I misinterpreted what you said. But I'm just wondering, because I mean, that's a situation that you get, particularly in organizations that have a matrix structure. You've got a
Yeah,
lot of competing objectives and priorities. And I'm just interested in your take on that, if that's what you meant by that.
it is. And I thought we would have a lot in common. So in terms of diversity, I thought, I knew there'd be a bit of diversity. I had no idea how different this team would be in terms of cognitive diversity. So the demographic diversity was one thing. So we had different nationalities and cultures and religions and gender and generations. That was one thing. But the cognitive diversity, so the introverts and the extroverts and the big picture storytellers versus my electrical engineer from Germany who was right into the detail of things, as engineers are, that was a much bigger challenge. And I assumed we'd all know why, our purpose for being in Antarctica, which is to support science. But I needed to find a way that the electrician or the carpenter could see how they were contributing to the science, because unless they could see that link, unless they had line of sight from the tasks that they performed and how that linked into the Antarctic science, I couldn't get them to commit to that or sign up to that. And honestly, I thought it would be a simple thing. I went to my group of scientists in summer. I had 21 different scientists from all around the world. And I asked them to please write, just in plain English, a one-page document that laid out their science. What are you trying to do here? What are you trying to achieve? And I thought it would take me maybe a day. It took me 2 weeks because they kept sending it back to me. And I kept saying, I don't understand that. And if I don't understand that, then I can't communicate that to someone who's had no science background whatsoever and potentially left school at a young age to take a trade, which a lot of tradespeople do, to do their apprenticeship. And it took me 2 weeks back and forwards, and the scientists are saying, oh, but it dilutes the hypothesis. And I'm like, yep, okay, but it still has to be really plain English because it has to be understood. And I need that commitment. If you need that electrician to come back to work at 9 o'clock at night when they've knocked off to fix one of your tools or one of your instruments, then I need them to commit to that and go, yeah, I know why I'm doing this, not be grumpy that I've called them back to work at 9 o'clock at night so you can go out in the morning and do your research. So yeah, it was a real challenge that I didn't expect and I underestimated, but I had to put a lot of time. The two things I had to put a lot of time into, one was hooking each person into that overall aim of the expedition. And the other thing was coaching the team on how to have difficult conversations, which I had never envisaged would be my job. But I learned early on that if I could give them those skills to have the difficult conversation with each other, that would free up my time and energy. And it took me 2 months of coaching because some of them have had no leadership training whatsoever and had no idea how to have a difficult conversation. And I invested heavily in that. But in the long term, that paid off. The dividends and the return on investment for that decision were huge. But I never expected that going in. I never thought that was in my job description at all.
But isn't it interesting though that we know for particularly for an expedition, you could make an assumption that everybody has got they have a shared vision, and you discover they didn't, and it was actually creating that shared vision. And I always find when I'm working with companies, and sometimes I kind of hesitate a little bit because here's oh God, here's a bloody consultant coming in talking about vision, right? But actually, it's so important because that's the context in which we're doing everything. And to have clarity and alignment on that vision is massively important. Can I go back to something you said earlier on? I just wanted to go because I was interested in what you said. Was that you believe that your job there was to develop leaders and not necessarily followers?
Yeah.
Explain what you meant by that, because I really like that.
I had to be explicit about that. I had to use those words. I had to say to them, to the team, that leadership is a behavior. It's not a title. And because if I wasn't explicit, if I didn't say those words, then they would assume I was the leader and I would make the decisions. And I said to them, no, leadership is a behavior, and I fully expect every single one of you to demonstrate leadership. So if you see something that needs to be done, you do something about it. If you have a great idea, I want to hear it. Come and tell me, because I said to them, it's not my job, particularly in that environment. And that's another thing I learned down there. So it's a harsh environment. Safety is everything. Our nearest hospital is 9 months away. We can't get in or out. We don't have a hospital. It's 9 months till we can get to a hospital. So the last thing I wanted was someone to get hurt. So safety was everything. And so I said, if you see a piece of equipment that is unsafe for whatever reason, you do something about it. You don't tell me, or you don't tell whichever trade it is that's in charge of that particular piece of equipment. You do something about that. And so the culture of the team was they were all expected to demonstrate leadership. And I think it's really important now, particularly, again, going back to the challenges in the world at the moment, that as leaders, we've got enough on our plate to deal with leading. We need to instill a culture of leadership with the rest of our team and say, you can all demonstrate leadership behavior. By all means, I'm the leader, and I will make the ultimate decisions and I'll carry the accountability for those decisions. But I expect all of you to demonstrate the behavior of leadership, which is if you see something that needs to be done, please do something about it. But I had to say the words. I didn't think that would be necessary. I kind of thought that I could model that behavior and they'd pick up. So I would ask opinions or I'd ask for ideas. But no, I actually had to say those words because I needed to give them that go ahead or the green light that, yeah, if you come up with a great idea, I really want to hear it. And it took pressure off me as well. So it built accountability. So going back to your previous question around that vision, it hooked them all into the vision because every single one of us had responsibility for that vision, and every single one of us I expected to contribute to it. So I devolved the leadership amongst the whole team and we all contributed to the vision. So it helped in that way as well.
Yeah, listen, I think that's a great lesson, and I did want to go back to that because I was really interested when you actually made that comment earlier on. This has been, Rachel, this has been great. I mean, it's been fantastic. We could go on talking forever, but I'm taking up time that I promised you I would finish earlier. But before we wrap up, 2 questions I ask everybody: a book other than your own that's had an impact upon you, and what is the book and what was the impact?
The book I've just finished is a book called Useful Belief by an author called Chris Helder, who lives in Australia, but he is an American. And he moved out here he married an Australian woman, I think 20 years ago, and moved out here. But useful belief in one sentence means if you can't change something, you can't change a situation you're in, or you don't want to change the situation, it's better to have a useful belief around it. So useful belief is better than positive thinking. And that's the whole concept of it, that rather than just think positively about something, have a useful belief around it. So it's useful for me to think that at this moment in time, it's, you know, the best time to be alive, or whatever that belief might be. I think for me, it's traveling. I travel a lot. And so rather than complain about being stuck at an airport for 4 hours with a delayed flight, I don't want to change the fact I travel. I can't change the fact I need to travel a lot for my job. So I have a useful belief, which is traveling gives me the chance to see new people and new places, and it's exciting, and how fortunate am I? So that's my useful belief. Yeah.
I like that. I think that's really good.
Yeah.
And not a book that I've heard of as well. So that goes on my list. So thank you for that. Second question is daily rituals, things that really kind of help you to kind of get through the day, kick off a day, deal with the day, whatever it might be.
I love walking on the beach with my dog. I've got a golden retriever, and
Oh, lovely.
well, he's a golden. He doesn't retrieve anything, so I just call him a golden. But I take him down to the beach each morning, even if it's only 15 minutes. It's just a line in the sand, or even if I cannot get outside until lunchtime, I still do it because it's a marker. It's a delineation that I'm out physically outside, and just looking at the ocean. Gosh, I could just look at the ocean, and I mean, that's the joy of Antarctica, that for the first time in my life, I actually noticed the moon. The moon's there every night, but because I'm not outside at night, I never notice the moon. Like a lot of people, you know it's there, but you don't tend to look at it. Whereas when it's dark 24 hours a day, and the moon's sort of hovering around the horizon, it's right in your line of sight, you actually notice the moon, and you start thinking about, oh, I wonder what the moon, why we only see one side of the moon, and then you start thinking about it. So I love just looking at oceans and moons and places like that, and just thinking of my place in the world and how much opportunity is out there. And look, we've come right back to the first question around opportunity, and
Absolutely.
just going out there and grabbing it. Just do it.
That's lovely. I love that. Rachel, this has been absolutely fantastic. I'm really grateful. How can people get in touch with you? We'll put everything in the show notes, but if they're listening right now, how can they get in touch with you?
Oh, I'd love to hear from anyone. That'd be fantastic. My website is my name, so it's just rachelrobertson.com.
Great. Okay. Well, listen, I'm sure they will link there, because there's some good stuff on the website. I did have a look, and it's a great, great story. Rachel, you're so kind to come and give us your time today. I wish you continued success, and thanks for telling us a great story.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.